the Episcopal Church, so tied to tradition coming from the Anglican Communion, it's amazing that this particular feast is not one of our own. It's a relatively recent feast. As a matter of fact, we stole it from the Roman Catholics. Back in mid-1920s, the Pope at the time, who was neither extraordinarily good or bad, he was sort of a mediocre, Pius XI, he had the wisdom and the insight looking around, looking at what was happening to Europe. And he saw the growth of totalitarian governments on both the extreme left and the extreme right. He saw the growth of communism in the Soviet Union, fascism in Italy, and soon Germany. So he forced a group together and basically changed the church calendar that at the end of the church year we would celebrate a feast that reminds us one simple message, that the state is not supreme. And the state does not exercise absolute authority over people, over your minds or your hearts. That we who are members of the Jesus movement, we worship one Lord, one King. So the reading is always the one of irony. There's a confrontation that took place over 2,000 years ago between someone who was extremely powerful and someone who was absolutely not. One very important and one utterly unimportant. One is the symbol of a dictatorship and a conquering army. He had literally the authority of life and death. He was so important, so significant, that history remembers him by name. And he is remembered in the documents of a religion that he did not even belong to. And we will say his name in a couple of moments when we utter the phrase, he suffered under Pontius Pilate. Pilate was, if I can use the sports analogy, there is that type of coach, I've met him once or twice in my life in different forms, that is not where they actually are. Their body may be in one place, their mind is somewhere else. And they take on the small, unimpressive high school or college team because they want to be noticed so that they can get to where they really want to be. And Pilate was on that bureaucratic ladder, trying to prove that he could make order. He could make Palestine great again, if I could use the phrase. And I'm not being political. This was his mindset. And the movie version of Pilate as the weak, cowering, indecisive fool is just Hollywood's version of fake news. Pilate was a bad stop on a bureaucratic passage. He was nasty and single-minded, and the machine just cut me off?
No.
Maybe God did, at any rate. Or maybe Pilate did. You know, part of the Christian tradition says that one day, when, as the story is told, he ultimately becomes a Christian. I'd like to think that was true of my heart of hearts. I don't believe it. But Pilate was the type to make himself notice in the most horrific ways. And I'll give you two examples. First and foremost, he would antagonize the people of Palestine simply because he had the power to do so. So there was one time he takes the military standards, which had the impression of Caesar on the banner, and had them placed in the temple in direct violation of not only Jewish law, but of the commandments. I'm the Lord your God. You will not have any graven images before me. The image of Caesar is a graven image. He created the riot situation because he knew he could. He also was the type, and we get this not from the Bible, but from Josephus, the historian, who said that at one time Pilate created an issue, but he also had members of his own guard scattered within the crowd, dressed in ordinary clothes. And they carried these tiny little, very sharp, two-edged swords, known as sicarii. You know, Judas Iscariot, that's where the word comes from. Okay? Nasty sword, really does a lot of damage. And they could hide it in the folds of their robe. And they were scattered through the crowd. Pilate did whatever, and I can't remember the particular idiotic thing he did. The crowd of protesters come together. His soldiers wearing plain clothes are in the crowd. He gives the signal, and he was able to take out the leadership and murder them. That's the Pilate of history. That's the Pilate, the truthful Pilate. He's on the one side of this confrontation. And on the other side is a Galilean peasant, a woodworker, a healer, a religious teacher who has no political power, no political aspirations, betrayed and abandoned by just about everyone except for a couple of women who cared for him and his people as they traveled about. And we know him as God incarnate. Of course, Pilate has no knowledge, nor would he care. And there's a dialogue of sorts. Are you a king? Well, yeah, but my kingdom's not from here. Oh, you really are a king? looking at this guy who he has the power of life and death over. And John, in the brilliance of his writing, communicates that what's going on is a reversal of roles. And if you read the scriptures with an open mind and an open heart, what you hear, ultimately, Jesus putting Pilate on trial. That's what really happens. Because yes, this is a criminal trial, and it is, to use a dated expression, a kangaroo court. And yes, it was about a Roman versus a Jew, about religion versus the state, about the rich versus the poor, the powerful versus the oppressed. All of that's going on in the confrontation of the two. But what really is going on is that we who are the observers in the crowd, who hear these words again just as those who saw them played out, are being asked a question. Here it is before you. Who do you serve? Who's the center of your life? To whom do you belong? Who gives your life meaning? In our secular post-Christian society, we who are members of the Jesus movement, we have to live with this reality. We live in two kingdoms, but we cannot serve two kings. You have to choose. That's unpleasant. That doesn't give you warm fuzzies, but that's the truth of who we are as believers in Jesus. Who do you serve? Whom do you love? Who gives meaning to your life? And if Jesus is the center of life, if you realize that the kingship of God isn't about a place or a state of being or something about the future, but it is about our relationship with Jesus and with each other. If we really understand that Jesus' kingdom is greater than all of the political, military, and economic powers that have ever been or will ever be, then we profess with our lives that we believe in Jesus Christ, his only Son, our Lord. We believe in his victory, and we ultimately believe that being a member of this movement means we are a member of God's time and God's space and God's place. And that is greater than all of the weapons, all of the swords, all of the nukes, all of the weapons of mass destruction of any warrior god that this culture of ours worships. That there is only one ultimate power, and that is the power of compassionate love. And where that exists, God exists, for God is love. If Christ is your center, you belong to him. He is your king. You hear his voice. You know that he testifies to the truth. You say that I'm a king. For this was I born, for this I came into the world, to testify to the truth. Everyone who belongs to the truth listens to my voice. Do you belong to the truth? Do you listen to his voice?